Okay, here we are. We are continuing through the New Testament. We are in the Gospel of John. We're in chapter 6, so we're making some pretty good progress. And we're going to start in verse 16 because verses 1 through 15 are Jesus feeding the 5,000. And if you were with us with the other Gospels, Matthew, Mark, Luke, then we've gone through this account. So we're just going to pick up with 16. And we've also done this account, but it sets up for what's going on in the passage we're going to look at today. So let's go for it. Chapter 16. When evening came, his disciples went down to the lake. Well, the lake was central to where they lived, and it was central to their life. It was central to their community life. Water was very, very important in the first century, of course, where there's no indoor plumbing or ways of bringing water to you. So where they got into a boat and they set off across the lake for Capernaum. So now they're heading to Capernaum. Jesus has been staying there. And so by now it was dark, and Jesus had not yet joined them. A strong wind was blowing, and the waters grew rough. And when they had rowed 3 or 4 miles, they saw Jesus approaching the boat, walking on the water, and they were frightened. Well, I would say that's a pretty standard response. If you saw someone walking towards you, and he said, "It's I, don't be afraid." I love that. It's I, don't be afraid. And then they were willing to take him into the boat, and immediately the boat reached the shore where they were heading. So there's a miracle in that the boat gets to the shore immediately once Jesus jumps in. And so once Jesus jumps into our life, we get to the shore immediately. There's just a lot of application there. The next day, the crowd that had stayed on the opposite side of the lake realized that only one boat had been there, and that Jesus had not entered it with his disciples, but had gone away alone. Then some boats from Tiberias landed near the place where the people had eaten the bread after the Lord had given thanks. Going back to the account we didn't read, verses 1 through 15. Once the crowd realized that neither Jesus nor his disciples were there, they got into the boats and they went to Capernaum in search of Jesus. So they're wanting to follow Jesus. They're wanting to see the things that he's doing. Are some of them following him for bread? Seems like some of them are following him just for bread. Does that happen today? Do people follow him just for bread? Yeah, it happens today. Particularly being involved in the leadership of a church, the administration of a church, you would not believe the number of people that come to us just looking for bread or whatever that might mean, extrapolated out to mean things. And then they tell us, well, I thought you were like Jesus. You're not like Jesus. You're not giving us any bread. The issue of bread. And what kind of bread is important anyway? Verse 25. When they found him on the other side of the lake, they asked him, "Rabbi, when did you get here? What's going on?" And Jesus said, "Verily, truly, I say to you, you are looking for me not because you saw the signs I performed, but because you ate the loaves and you had your fill." So people just following Jesus for the stuff, for the bread, for the whatever, fill in the blank. He said, "Don't work for food that spoils, but for food that endures to eternal life, which the Son of Man will give you, for on him God has placed his seal of approval." Jesus can give you eternal life. And what we really want to do is we want to be fed on those things which are eternal. You know, meals come and meals go. I guarantee you, if I asked you what you had for a meal last October 17th, you couldn't tell me. But these spiritual experiences that we have with God and the filling of our life with Jesus Christ and encountering Jesus Christ, boy, that really makes a difference. And this is what Jesus said when he was tempted in the desert by Satan, where Satan said, "You turn these stones into bread." And Jesus said, "Man doesn't live by bread alone." That's what we're all worried about, though, isn't it? Then they asked him, "What must we do to do the work God requires?" And he said, "This is the work." You want to know the work that God requires? Here's the work. The work of God is to believe on the one who he sent. So that's the work of God. I'm doing the work in the will of God when I'm believing the one who he has sent, believing on Jesus, believing that he can forgive my sins, believing that he can raise me on the last day, believing that he can give me life, believing that his way is the way to live and to walk. Verse 30. So they asked him, "What sign then will you give to those? What sign will you give that we might see and believe you? What will you do? Our ancestors ate manna in the wilderness," as they're still concerned with bread. And they're interesting. Even our ancestors, God used to give them bread. He gave them manna in heaven. And he gave them, it is written, he gave them bread from heaven to eat. They want the bread. This is all about them wanting the bread. Jesus said, very truly I say to you, it's not Moses that gave you the bread from heaven, but it was my Father who gives you the true bread from heaven. For the bread of God is the bread that comes down from heaven and gives life to the world. What's the bread that we need? The bread that we need, the life that we need is Jesus. The sustenance that we need is Jesus. The life that we need is Jesus. Without Jesus, we don't have life. Jesus said, I've come that you might have life and have life more abundantly, and that he can give us life. So we don't have life. We remember in a previous passage, if you were here with us when we did the previous passages, it said that we moved from death to life. We moved from death to life. He's able to do that. He's able to give us life. Sir, they said, give us this bread. They're still concerned with bread. And Jesus said, I'm the bread of life. And whoever comes to me will never hunger, and whoever believes in me will never be thirsty. But as I told you, you have seen me, and you still don't believe me. All that the Father gives me will come to me, and whoever comes to me, I'll never drive away. Anybody that comes to Jesus, he's not going to, get out of here, stay away from me. Anyone that comes to Jesus, he receives him into the family. For I have come down from heaven not to do my will, but to do the will of him who sent me, what Jesus said in the previous chapter. I only do those things which I see the Father doing. And this is the will of him who sent me, that I not lose and I lose none of all of those that he has given me, but raise him up on the last day. So here's the work of Jesus, is to keep us safe, to protect us, to give us eternal life. And on the last day, be it my last day or be it the last day of the world, Jesus will raise us up to be with him forever. I can trust that. I can believe that he will give me eternal life. For my Father's will is everyone who looks to the Son and believes in him shall have eternal life, and I'll raise him up on that last day. Well, at this, the Jews began to grumble about him because he said, I'm the bread that's come from heaven. Well, that's what the whole Gospel of John is about, right? The other ones have the earthly genealogies, but this one has the genealogy of the one who's come from heaven. God himself came and lived with us for a while and came to be the bread that gives us life, the sustenance that we need for life. They said, isn't this Jesus, the son of Joseph, whose father and mother we know? How can he say I came from heaven? Well, they're getting it. They're understanding that Jesus is saying that he is God, that he has come from heaven. And Jesus said, stop grumbling among yourselves. He said, no one can come to me unless the Father who sent me draws them, and I will raise them up on the last day. It's written in the prophets, they will all be taught by God. Everyone who has heard the Father and has learned from him comes to me. No one has seen the Father except the one who is from the Son. Only he has seen the Father. Jesus has seen the Father. He and the Father are one. Very truly I say to you, the one who believes in me has eternal life. He keeps saying this. Believe in him, that's how you get eternal life. I'm the bread of life. Your ancestors ate manna in the wilderness, yet they died. Speaking of the Old Testament, when they were coming out of Egypt and moving to the Promised Land, God gave them manna from heaven, just like Jesus came from heaven. But here's the bread that comes from heaven, which anyone may eat and not die. If you eat this, you won't die. You'll live forever. I'm the living bread that comes down from heaven. Whoever eats this bread will live forever. The bread is my flesh, which I will give for the life of the world. So Jesus gives us life. Let's consume Jesus. Let's take Jesus, the bread of life. Then the Jews began to argue sharply among themselves. How can this man give his flesh to eat? And Jesus said, truly I tell you, unless you eat the flesh of the Son and drink his blood, you have no life in me. Ooh, what's he talking about? Whoever eats my flesh and drinks my blood has eternal life, and I will raise him up on the last day. Making the same point over and over again. For my flesh is real food, and my blood is real drink. Whoever eats my flesh and drinks my blood remains in me, and I in them. Just as the living Father sent me, and I live because of the Father, so the one who feeds on me will live because of me. This is the bread that came from heaven. Your ancestors ate just regular bread and died, but whoever feeds on this bread will live forever. He said this while he was teaching in the synagogue at Capernaum. So let's eat of the bread of life. Let's drink of the wine of his blood. being saved and then having life more abundantly. It goes on and it says, on hearing this, a lot of his disciples left. They were like, this is a hard saying. What's he talking about? And Jesus says to the 12, he says, do you want to leave too? In verse 67, and Simon Peter said, Lord, to whom would we go? You alone have the words of eternal life. So you want to leave too? Where would I go? Where would I go? Where can I go? There's no place to go. He's the only one to come to, and there's no reason to leave. And where would you go if you left? So you are loved by God. You're loved by God. You're loved by God. You experience eternal life, forever life, and abundant life here. You are loved. You are loved. You are loved. Hey, bless you guys. We'll continue in the Gospel of John, chapter 7 next time. Bless you. Love you.